Apple proclaimed its leadership in the drive to put the users of technology back into control over their data. And Tim, as CEO, leads Apple's efforts to realize that vision. It has meant taking risks and even creating conflict among other Silicon Valley businesses. But do not listen to the detractors. This has not and will not end the internet or reduce its utility or accessibility. It is my very great pleasure to introduce Tim and to hear how that thinking has developed over the last couple of years and what lies ahead in one of the defining moments of the digital age. Tim, we're very grateful to you for giving up your time and agreeing to lead off our panel. Please take the screen.
Good afternoon. And John, thank you so much for that generous introduction and for hosting us today. It's a privilege to join you and to learn from this knowledgeable panel on this fitting occasion of Data Privacy Day. A little more than 2 years ago, joined by my good friend, the much-missed Giovanni Guidarelli, and data protection regulators from around the world, I spoke in Brussels about the emergence of a data industrial complex. At that gathering, we asked ourselves, what kind of world we want to live in? 2 years later, we should now take a hard look at how we've answered that question. The fact is that an interconnected ecosystem of companies and data brokers, of purveyors of fake news and peddlers of division, of trackers and hucksters just looking to make a quick buck, is more present in our lives than it has ever been. And it has never been so clear how it degrades our fundamental right to privacy first and our social fabric by consequence. As I've said before, if we accept as normal and unavoidable that everything in our lives can be aggregated and sold, then we lose so much more than data. We lose the freedom to be human. And yet, this is a hopeful new season, a time of thoughtfulness and reform. And the most concrete progress of all is thanks to many of you. Proving cynics and doomsayers wrong, the GDPR has provided an important foundation for privacy rights around the world, and its implementation and enforcement must continue. But we can't stop there. We must do more. And we're already seeing hopeful steps forward worldwide, including a successful ballot initiative strengthening consumer protections right here in California. Together, we must send a universal humanistic response to those who claim a right to users' private information about what should not and will not be tolerated. As I said in Brussels 2 years ago, it is certainly time, not only for a comprehensive privacy law here in the United States, but also for worldwide laws and new international agreements that enshrine the principles of data minimization, user knowledge, user access, and data security across the globe. At Apple, spurred on by the leadership of many of you in the privacy community, these have been 2 years of unceasing action. We have worked to not only deepen our own core privacy principles, but to create ripples of positive change across the industry as a whole. We've spoken out time and again for strong encryption without backdoors, recognizing that security is the foundation of privacy. We've set new industry standards for data minimization, user control, and on-device processing for everything from location data to your contacts and photos. At the same time that we've led the way in features that keep you healthy and well, we've made sure that technologies like a blood oxygen sensor and an ECG come with peace of mind that your health data stays yours. And last but not least, we are deploying powerful new requirements to advance user privacy throughout the App Store ecosystem. The first is a simple but revolutionary idea that we call the privacy nutrition label. Every app, including our own, must share their data collection and privacy practices. Information that the App Store presents in a way every user can understand and act on. The second is called App Tracking Transparency. At its foundation, ATT is about returning control to users, about giving them a say over how their data is handled. Users have asked for this feature for a long time. We have worked closely with developers to give them the time and resources to implement it. And we're passionate about it because we think it has great potential to make things better for everybody. Because ATT responds to a very real issue. Earlier today, we released a new paper called A Day in the Life of Your Data. It tells the story of how apps that we use every day contain an average of 6 trackers. This code often exists to surveil and identify users across apps watching and recording their behavior. In this case, what the user sees is not always what they get. Right now, users may not know whether the apps they use to pass the time, to check in with their friends, or to find a place to eat may in fact be passing on information about the photos they've taken, the people in their contact list, or location data that reflects where they eat, sleep, or pray. As the paper shows, it seems no piece of information is too private or personal to be surveilled, monetized, and aggregated into a 360-degree view of your life. The end result of all of this is that you are no longer the customer, you are the product. When ATT is in full effect, users will have a say over this kind of tracking. Some may well think that sharing this degree of information is worth it for more targeted ads. Many others, I suspect, will not, just as most appreciated it when we built a similar functionality into Safari, limiting web trackers several years ago. We see developing these kinds of privacy-centric features and innovations as a core responsibility of our work. We always have, we always will. The fact is that the debate over ATT is a microcosm of the debate we've been having for a long time, one where our point of view is very clear. Technology does not need vast troves of personal data stitched together across dozens of websites and apps in order to succeed. Advertising existed and thrived for decades without it. And we're here today because the path of least resistance is rarely the path of wisdom. If a business is built on misleading users, on data exploitation, on choices that are no choices at all, then it does not deserve our praise. It deserves reform. We should not look away from the bigger picture. At a moment of rampant disinformation and conspiracy theories juiced by algorithms, we can no longer turn a blind eye to a theory of technology that says all engagement is good engagement. The longer the better, and all with the goal of collecting as much data as possible. Too many are still asking the question, how much can we get away with? When they need to be asking, what are the consequences? What are the consequences of prioritizing conspiracy theories and violent incitement simply because of the high rates of engagement? What are the consequences of not just tolerating but rewarding content that undermines public trust in life-saving vaccinations? What are the consequences of seeing thousands of users join extremist groups and then perpetuating an algorithm that recommends even more? It is long past time to stop pretending that this approach doesn't come with a cost of polarization, of lost trust, and yes, of violence. A social dilemma cannot be allowed to become a social catastrophe. I think the past year and certainly recent events have brought home the risk of this for all of us as a society and as individuals as much as anything else. Long hours spent cooped up at home, the challenge of keeping kids learning when schools are closed, the worry and uncertainty about what the future would hold. All of these things threw into sharp relief how technology can help and how it can be used to harm. Will the future belong to the innovations that make our lives better, more fulfilled, and more human? Or will it belong to those tools that prize our attention to the exclusion of everything else, compounding our fears and aggregating extremism to serve ever more invasively targeted ads over all other ambitions? At Apple, we made our choice a long time ago. We believe that ethical technology is technology that works for you. It's technology that helps you sleep, not keeps you up. It tells you when you've had enough. It gives you space to create or draw or write or learn, not refresh just one more time. It's technology that can fade into the background when you're on a hike or going for a swim, but is there to warn you when your heart rate spikes or help you when you've had a nasty fall. And that all of this always puts privacy and security first, because no one needs to trade away the rights of their users to deliver a great product. Call us naive, but we still believe that technology made by people, for people, and with people's well-being in mind is too valuable a tool to abandon. We still believe that the best measure of technology is the lives it improves. We are not perfect. We will make mistakes. That's what makes us human. But our commitment to you, now and always, is that we will keep faith with the values that have inspired our products from the very beginning. Because what we share with the world is nothing without the trust our users have in it. To all of you who have joined us today, please keep pushing us all forward. Keep setting high standards that put privacy first, and take new and necessary steps to reform what is broken. We've made progress together, and we must make more. Because the time is always right to be bold and brave in service of a world where, as Giovanni Butarelli put it, technology serves people and not the other way around. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim, for those words and for that launch of this session. I think we're going to have a fantastic discussion. I know you're very busy and your diary is going to prevent you from joining us for that discussion, but we thank you again. And I now turn to the rest of the panel to pick up some of the challenges that Tim's laid down for us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, now that's some inspirational start. Let me introduce my panel to continue the discussion. I don't think we've yet got Marcel with us, but we will be joined by Marcel Collager, who is a member and Vice President of the European Parliament. He's a member of the Committee of the Internal Market and Consumer Protection and a substitute in the Committee on Culture and Education, where he worked on Parliament's INI reports on the Digital Services Act. He's been a member of the Czech Pirate Party since 2010 and held several positions as Vice President of the Czech Pirate Party and co-chair of Pirate Parties International. He has a diploma from the Faculty of Informatics at Maastricht University in Brno. It's a great pleasure to introduce Lucy Purdon, who you see on your screen. Lucy is a Policy Director with Privacy International and is responsible for policy development. She also leads and supports projects targeting companies that exploit people and their data, preventing data exploitation in the election cycle, protecting identity, and protecting those targeted through their use of technology because of who they are or what they do. Lucy previously led the ICT program at the Institute for Human Rights in Business, working on global corporate responsibility to protect privacy and freedom of expression in line with UN guiding principles on business and human rights. She's also been a documentary producer and filmmaker. Marshall Ewan is the Chief Security Officer at Mozilla Corporation, where he leads teams responsible for protecting Mozilla and its users. He's been a key driver of major privacy initiatives in the Firefox browser, such as enhanced tracking protection and DNS over HTTPS. And finally, we have Jane Horvath, the Senior Director of Global Privacy at Apple. She's been with the company since 2011 and brings more than a decade of information privacy and legal experience to that role. She's responsible for overseeing Apple's compliance with global privacy laws, as well as working internally and externally on developing issues related to privacy. Prior to Apple, Jane was the Global Privacy Counsel at Google. And before that, she served as the Department of Justice's first Chief Privacy Counsel and Civil Liberties Officer. So with those introductions, I'm going to see if we've got Marcel with us. We have. Marcel, I'd like to invite you to open our discussion with some observations from the parliamentary side of the equation. I'm going to give you 5 to 7 minutes and then we'll come back in and move on, I think, to Lucy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this event. I would like to speak about, how privacy is really important to everyone in everybody's life, and how, excessive data gathering is an issue because it poses threats to everybody's privacy. And now we need to realize that this massive data gathering that is being done is kind of like across the internet. We've been targeted with advertisement. There is massive data collection all over the place, and it's not really specific to one particular business model. There, are hundreds of ad tech companies tracking users, and these entities are totally unknown to users. And the opposite of the ad tech system is clearly one of the issues. Now, recent one of also the issues is that these this type of data gathering and later targeting can also lead to price discrimination when data on the purchase history is collected, browsing habits, economic situation, and all that is used in order to maximize the price for the consumer, and then that is definitely one of the issues that we have been seeing. But that's not everything. The recent events, such as Brexit or such as the political situation in the United States, they really highlighted additional challenges to our democracy. For instance, these so-called filtering bubbles or information rabbit holes that are really, created, the users are kept in them, and where, the users are kept in a space where the most relevant ads can be showed to them. But also, with that experience, it comes hand in hand that people basically see only information that is one-sided, and that poses a real threat to our society, because as we've been seeing, it polarizes our society. What we've been seeing is that people basically are not disagreeing on different opinions, which of course that is a part of every healthy discussion, and every democracy has the exchange of views, and then opinions are being built. But the problem is that people are seeing a completely different sets of information as a result of this targeting. And if people come from a basically different set of facts or so-called facts, then of course they can never agree to each other. And this polarization in the society, I believe, is one of the biggest issues that we've been facing over the course of the recent years. One of the biggest issues that we've been facing online, but it apparently has implications to the offline world, to the core of our society, to democracies. Now, what can we do about it? The European Commission is launching initiatives such as the Digital Services Act and the European Democracy Action Plan, where some of these issues will be tackled. They will be tackled, or the proposal, at least as we can see it at this moment from the Commission, goes into the direction of increased transparency and transparency obligations around advertising. And the Commission apparently is going to the direction to split the political advertisement and the commercial one, dealing with two different legislative initiatives. And in these, the very large platforms would be subject to certain specific obligations, such as on recommendation systems. They would have to explain in the terms of conditions how, and provide information on how the system can be modified. It also goes into the direction on transparency on advertisement, on what is the natural or legal person whose advertisement it is, and which group is targeted, etc., etc. Now, I believe because one of the issues is that this everything is really complex. I started, my speech with, speaking about the ad tech, how a complex chain of companies that is. And I am afraid that and I am also being told by experts that transparency itself is not going to resolve the issue. So I believe that we also have to go an extra mile. We have to look into targeted advertising. We need to look at how it works. We need to look at what are types of it, what type of information is collected, and go the direction of basically banning targeted advertising, which abuses personal data, and find really a way out of this very, very severe issue that we've been having.
Marcelo,
with that, I would like to stop, because I also realize that I am most probably over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just barely over time, so it was a great discipline. We're going to go to now Lucy Purdon. I think we can say that as a long-standing member of civil society, Lucy represents and speaks for consumers. Lucy, over to you.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone, and happy Data Protection Day. This is a very timely time to have this conversation. I wanted to give the view of this issue from where Privacy International sits as a human rights organisation working to defend privacy around the world. So I'd like to outline our concerns, some of our actions, and what we are calling for. So we are very concerned about the lack of transparency of the ad tech and data broker industry, and that this data collection and profiling is mostly invisible to the user. The majority of companies involved in this industry are unlikely to be household names, and you probably won't have a relationship with them or interact with them directly, but they know a lot about you because it's their business to do so. Now, the consequence of this is that it becomes extremely difficult to exercise your rights as a data subject if you don't know who has your data or what they are doing with it. So data collection is the first step in a long and opaque process of online targeted advertising. And we're very concerned about not only the lack of visibility or transparency in these activities, but also where the sources of data are coming from, because it's often very surprising to find out what data has been collected about you and where it's come from. So PI's investigations into the data broker and ad tech industry over the years has been like dealing with a very large Russian doll. You know, we're always revealing another layer of complexity, uses of data and sources of data that is often quite shocking. So for example, one of our investigations a couple of years ago analysed 136 mental health websites in France, Germany and the UK. And we found that 76% of those websites contained third-party trackers for marketing purposes. So they weren't just trackers for the functioning of the sites. And we also found that several online tests for depression were actually sharing the actual test answers with third parties. Now, this is sensitive information, and the average user would not expect this to be shared with a large number of companies that is fed back into the online advertising industry. So at PI, we highlight these abuses and we bring them to the attention of the public and also the regulator where necessary. And we've done this in France regarding one of the mental health websites I mentioned, and also in Ireland and the UK, where we submitted complaints about 8 data brokers, ad tech companies and credit reference agencies. And at PI, we also provide guides for users on how to exercise your rights as a data subject. So how to submit a data subject access request, how to request deletion of data, but also guides on how to limit tracking and ads that you see. And in fact, today we've published a very in-depth piece of work that we call Secret Identities that sheds more light on how this industry works and the kind of companies that collect your data with every click. So at PI, we're calling for transparency of the industry and limits on data collection, because where there is little transparency, exploitation is rife. And where actions are invisible, it takes control away from you as a user. And really, data collection is a core problem here. It's gratuitous and it's out of control. And one of the other problems is that we often talk about data collection in the abstract to the point that it sounds harmless, and it's not. And I just wanted to give you an example of a company in the UK. This is a parenting club, an online parenting club that provides information for pregnant women and new mothers, but they also had access to maternity wards in hospitals and were collecting information from the bedside of new mothers who'd just given birth for marketing purposes. Now, the ICO in the UK, our data protection regulator, found that this company was also operating as a data broker for a time, and that they'd illegally shared the details of 14 million mothers and babies with 39 companies, including data brokers and credit reference agencies. And this company was fined. They stopped operating as a data broker. They changed their practices. But the problem is that that data is still out there, probably being sold and resold many times over and used in ways that these women have no idea about. So there's a real gap in protection there for people. And I've spoken to mothers who were caught up in this example, who are still very distressed about it. And they're really struggling to forgive themselves for handing over information about their children while in a temporarily vulnerable state after giving birth. You know, they were approached after traumatic births or struggling with postnatal depression, and those hours after giving birth are really private. So these examples demonstrate that methods of data collection in order to fuel the advertising industry are becoming more and more intrusive, and this needs to stop. So while the technical solutions we're talking about today are innovative and very welcome, we need regulation to step up and step in to curb data collection. Because if it doesn't happen, then it will be very difficult to boost user trust in advertising in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. And can I say, as a regulator, the work that Privacy International did particularly on the depression site, was very helpful because it identified issues in our own jurisdiction. And we can't have eyes everywhere, so we rely on the vigilance of organizations like yours to assist us. Let us cross then to the other side of the transaction and bring in Marshall Ewan. Are these measures going to break the internet? Are they going to ruin the existing business models, Marshall?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. It's interesting you asked this question about kind of ruining the internet and the existing business models, because our basic perspective is that the internet is the ecosystem that exists today is broken, especially the advertising ecosystem. Consumers are trapped in this vicious cycle in which their personal data is collected silently without them really knowing, and then used to target them and even manipulate them in malicious ways. Consumers' privacy is violated on a consistent basis, and they don't have a means of controlling that privacy. In addition, not only does it not work for consumers, but that ecosystem doesn't seem to be working for other players either, like critically content creators, who take advantage of some of these really sophisticated targeting tools, but yet at the same time don't seem to be thriving on the internet today. So Mozilla's approach here is pretty simple and clear. We are working to eliminate cross-site tracking on the web. Cross-site tracking being one of those key mechanisms that allows for that silent collection of data about consumers today. So very simple, to eliminate cross-site tracking across the web. Now, to do that, we've taken a series of initiatives. In 2019, we launched what we call enhanced tracking protection, which is on by default in the browser and blocks cookie-based tracking. So from the moment you start using the browser, the Firefox browser, this feature is enabled, and we are offering these important privacy protections to our users. In 2020, we launched protections for fingerprinting, another cross-site tracking technique that is often used and that we felt like was important to address. And then actually just on Tuesday, we launched a new version of the Firefox browser that protects users from what's called super cookies, yet another mechanism that's sometimes used to track people across sites. So this is what you should expect to see from Mozilla in the Firefox browser going forward, is this constant drumbeat of efforts to sort of crank up the privacy protections and eliminate cross-site tracking on the web. Now, it's important to call out maybe to talk explicitly about privacy on mobile. Fundamentally, in my view, the privacy properties of the mobile ecosystem are actually worse than the desktop browser ecosystem in many ways. And that's because of what we've heard referred to as IDFAs, or identifiers for advertisers. These are essentially like cookies on steroids, or another version of super cookies that have deliberately been built into the mobile platforms. Users don't know they exist really. They are persistent identifiers that are surfaced across parties. Now, one challenge that we run into at Mozilla is we provide a desktop browser, we have mobile browsers, but we don't have a mobile platform. And so what we really need to see is the companies that build these platforms making important changes. Organizations like Mozilla can't do it. We need to see changes to the IDFA from companies like Apple. That is why in 2019, the Mozilla Foundation launched a campaign encouraging Apple to take another look at its approach to the IDFA. Now, at the time, I think many people, even within Mozilla and outside of Mozilla, questioned the wisdom of running what amounted to a fairly aggressive advocacy campaign, being somewhat critical of Apple's, of this property of the Apple ecosystem. Now, in our view, though, there was at the time a disconnect between the great work that we've seen Apple do in the Safari browser and this IDA property on the OS. And we thought it was important to really call that out because this element of the tracking ecosystem regarding these advertising identifiers had, I think, really fallen under the radar, was not well appreciated, and is really, like I said, a real problem that in parallel needs to be solved in addition to some of the work in the browsers to address cookie-based tracking. So we launched that campaign in 2019. And then recently, really appreciate that Apple has stepped up and made these suggested changes to app tracking. I think it's really a sign of progress and a principled approach. Now, since these announcements were made last year to change the IFA, we've seen a significant pushback there. Now, Apple doesn't need me to defend its approach. It's quite capable of doing that on its own. But I will note that every major privacy initiative that Mozilla has tried to lead and drive over the last decade has resulted in significant amounts of pushback from parts of the industry that want to retain their somewhat illegitimate foothold on the data ecosystem. But when we see that pushback, we try to be very mindful of the potential impact we're going to have and really take on the feedback. However, over time, I think we've also come to appreciate that this pushback is actually a positive, that we're on the right track. That, again, just to go back to the basic message, the web is already broken. And that if we are not doing things that make people a little bit uncomfortable, even a little bit upset, then we're probably not doing the right thing to try to fix the internet. So that's really what I see, and that we've seen over and over again when this, what I think are really critical privacy initiatives. So I'll just close on noting that this winter, Mozilla, the Mozilla Foundation launched a petition encouraging users to express their support for Apple's decision and follow through on that. We got over 40,000 signatures on that petition, and I believe the day the Mozilla Foundation, the parent company of the Mozilla Corporation that I work for, has actually delivered those 40,000 signatures to Apple, showing support for the initiative. So this isn't just sort of Mozilla's position. I think this really reflects a groundswell of support for this change to the app ecosystem. And with that, John, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Marshall. Really helpful and insightful comments, getting a little bit more into the technical as well. I think, you know, you talked about the pushback, and I found that fascinating because these new initiatives from Apple require transparency, require a business to say to a user, here's what we're going to do. Now, if you don't have enough confidence in your business model to be open with your consumers, I think you need to have another look at your business model. Before I flip to Jane, I just want to remind all the viewers that there is a facility to put questions to the panel. So if you just click on that dialog box at the bottom of your screen if you're a registered participant, give us some questions for the Q&A. Jane, I guess Tim's outlined the why. Maybe you're going to drill down a little bit more into the how for us. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, John. It is a pleasure for me to be able to participate on this panel today and to join Marshall, Lucy, and Vice President Kalaja in discussing many of the issues which Tim raised in his opening remarks. On behalf of Apple, I want to thank each of you for joining us today. I also want to thank John for making an incredibly early start to his day in New Zealand, where it is already Friday. I'm going to elaborate upon some of the points that Tim made in his remarks. I'm also going to provide a little more detail on how app tracking transparency can further empower users to make informed choices on the use of their data for advertising. We are truly at an inflection point. What kind of digital experience do we want to have? Do we want to continue with the current norm, which involves a privacy trade-off, providing unlimited personal data in order to enjoy, in quotes, free services? As you heard from Tim, we reject that. It is a false dichotomy. Some say that advertising may suffer without all of that data. We reject that you can't reset the privacy paradigm and still have a robust advertising ecosystem. Also, the current system primarily benefits the large players in the industry. At the end of the day, all that we are doing with our App Tracking Transparency Framework, or ATT as it is commonly known, is giving users choice, asking individuals whether they want to be tracked or not. Think of it this way. Isn't it odd that some people don't want users to have the choice over whether or not they are tracked? with a clear and precise language. Relatedly, Apple has been unique among our peer companies in the tech industry in calling for the adoption of the e-privacy regulation. We continue to advocate for swift agreement in Council that does not compromise on the strong protections the legislation was designed to achieve. We are determined to continue to innovate and lead in rolling out technology solutions that embody the principles of privacy by design. This is an area which Europe has shown leadership through the GDPR. Apple has not suddenly turned to the issue of user tracking this year. Every year for well over a decade, we have iterated on past privacy innovations, and this one is no different. It is simply an evolution of the steps that we have taken over many years in this space. We have demonstrated time and again an industry-leading commitment to privacy by building strong protections for our users. And I also want to thank Marshall for the signatures that he passed on to us today. And it is very heartening to see that we have so much support for our newest innovations. And I also want to applaud Mozilla for all of the great steps that they have taken to protect privacy in Firefox. In 2017, Safari added a feature called Intelligent Tracking Prevention, or ITP for short, to address the problem of tracking. ITP uses machine learning and on-device processing to learn which domains are used to track a user, and then to immediately isolate and purge the tracking data. Importantly, the user's browsing history is not shared with Apple. Then, as now, some advertisers said our privacy-forward approach would sabotage the economic model for the internet. While it's obvious that did not happen, what did happen is that the user was provided with increased privacy protections. In 2018, we added fingerprinting defense to Safari to combat fingerprinting. Safari presents a simplified version of the system configuration, so more devices look identical to trackers, making it hard to single yours out. Our new ATT framework builds on top of this work by fostering two of the most important parts of a good privacy experience: transparency and control. The ATT framework is the latest in an evolution of protections to address cross-developer advertising on our operating systems. In 2012, in response to concerns that developers were using hardware identifiers or other methods to track and identify user devices, we introduced the IDFA. And in iOS 10, we instituted a technical fix to set the IDFA to all zeros when a user enabled limit ad tracking, because developers weren't respecting user choice. The app tracking permission will be presented to users when a developer wants to call the advertising identifier, or the IDFA, or if they otherwise track customers for advertising purposes or share data with data brokers. The operating system will only allow the developer access to the IDFA if the user agrees to tracking. Developers can use screens before and after the consent to explain to their users the value proposition of tracking. Again, completely a matter for the developer. Developers are responsible for making sure they're complying with the user's choice for tracking that is unrelated to the IDFA. If the user declines to give permission for tracking, developers cannot use any other identifier, such as a hashed email address or hashed phone number, to track the user across apps for purposes of advertising, nor can a developer share your data with a data broker. This is very important. Developers should not try to take steps to ignore the user's choice if the user asks not to be tracked. They should respect it. An important point here is that our new app tracking controls and transparency apply to all developers, including Apple. Apple does not access or use the IDFA on a user's device for any purpose. Apple Ad Platforms is a first-party advertising network which doesn't rely on third-party data, and Apple does not know which ads an individual user was served. Likewise, if developers want to use first-party data for ad personalization, they can continue to do so without utilizing the ATT framework. ATT is designed to put users in control over the mostly hidden uses of their data for advertising. So, if your favorite newspaper wants to use the articles you read to serve you advertising to fund its journalism, that is entirely a matter for it and you. We are also providing individual per app control for users, as we do with all of our operating system permissions. If they want to block all developers from asking for permission to use the IDFA, they can make that choice as well. Privacy-preserving advertising is possible, and it's something users want. Users should be able to choose for themselves how companies use their data for advertising and whether companies share their data with data brokers. The accumulation of large troves of data primarily benefits big businesses with big data sets while disregarding users' autonomy. The good news for you is that Apple will stand squarely beside you when it comes to designing privacy-preserving products. And as Tim said in his remarks, we say by people, for people, and with people's well-being in mind is too valuable a tool to abandon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. Well, we have now a bit of time for a discussion. I wonder where to start, reasonably specific. I'd like to wait for a few more, but I wonder, Marcel, if you mentioned a couple of initiatives that the Parliament is considering. Is fragmentation of the law in this area an issue, do you think? Do we need to have another look at a comprehensive framework for regulating the digital world?
Well, honestly, the biggest issue that I have...
I think you may be muted.
I just unmuted. Can you hear me now? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so the biggest issue that I have with fragmentation is if different member states in the European Union go their particular direction, because we know that the internet is global. In order to use the potential of the internet, we need rules that are not only clear but also that will allow companies to operate on the internet. And if we have different rules in different jurisdictions, that is always a problem. And what I am of a very strong opinion, or what is my very strong opinion on this, is that we truly need a common European approach. We need to make sure that the same rules apply in the whole European Union. And of course, I would be really, really glad if the initiative that the European Union has been taking in that direction is also followed by other jurisdictions around the globe.
Thank you. Lucy, does regulation go far enough to achieve this kind of vision that Tim Cook outlined earlier? Transparency, in your view?
Thank you. So, PI works globally, and we see a real spectrum of laws around the world. Some countries have no data protection law at all, and other countries or regions do have laws, and some are good, but the problem is enforcement. And when you get to very novel uses of data, for example, micro-targeting for political campaigning, laws are piecemeal and they're not consistent across countries. So this part of the reason that we do the investigations that we do is to be able to investigate these novel uses, bring them to the regulators and ask them to assess them with the existing laws. We very much would like to see the existing laws enforced. But yes, there are gaps for certain. And as regulation does move slowly, it's very good to see these technical responses step in. They're excellent in the short term, and they certainly bring visibility to the user. But the concern is that the industry will always adapt, and we want to prevent this kind of cat and mouse game between interested parties who are trying to circumvent each other's efforts. So regulation really needs to step in and settle this. And the principles of data minimization are there in most laws. It's just that they're being data collection is being applied in very novel and complex ways, and we need to start applying them to these methods.
Thank you. Jane, I wonder if you would address a question that's come in from the audience. Does Apple plan to change Safari's default search engine from Google to a privacy-focused search engine like DuckDuckGo, Quant, Ecosia, or one of the many alternative choices?
Right now, Google is the most popular search engine, so we do support Google, but we also have built-in support for DuckDuckGo, and we recently also rolled out support for Ecosia.
While we're with you, I'll give you another one which is a little technical. If Apple is really concerned about privacy, why are they excluding their own ad network, brackets SKA ad network, from the privacy conditions that are demanding from third parties? Do you understand the question?
I do, and SK Ad Networks is actually not an ad network. It is a analytics and measurement tool. So users can use SK Ad Networks, which is designed to be privacy friendly and not give out any private information, to do ad measurement and ad analytics.
Thank you. Marshall, when I first met Apple executives, it was in the lovely Isle of Mauritius in 2014, and I remember sitting on the terrace and saying, look, you've got the App Store, you've got this funnel, you could actually impose privacy standards on the sellers of these apps. Why don't you do that as a central point of contact? And we now see that to a certain degree coming to bear, not quite as I sort of envisaged it there, but now we see that. Should we be careful of what we've wished for? Is it right that a company that is effectively acting as a duopoly in the app market should be imposing these kinds of restrictions on other internet participants?
Yeah, so I'll say just kind of on the evolution that you mentioned there, I think that also reflects a change in our approach in recent years. I mean, we've always worked really hard on building a baseline level of protections into the browser, but then we also offered additional protections in what we call like private browsing mode. And that kind of good baseline, but then opt-in approach is one that we've really shifted away from because we thought it ultimately just puts too much expectation on the consumer to protect themselves from a threat that they don't necessarily know. Now our approach, I think consistent with some of the points you've heard from Apple, is to really try to get to a higher level of default protections than we had before. Your question is sort of getting at this sort of nexus of competition concerns. I think that we hear in the industry. I'll say it's a really challenging issue. Obviously, our view is that the internet is not as competitive as it needs to be today. There are serious competition problems, just like there are very serious privacy problems that need to be addressed. And I think what you will see from Mozilla is we need a set of approaches, typically in the regulatory framework, but also from companies themselves that drive to making the web more private and more competitive. And we're not going to settle for an internet that is more private but less competitive, and we're not going to settle for an internet that is more competitive but less private either. And so I think maybe the last comment on this is that we take the competition concerns very seriously in this space and think there's a lot of questions being raised that are worthy of further examination. But at the same time, I do think you see a fairly cynical effort to take advantage of what I think of as kind of this antitrust zeitgeist to try to force companies to walk back privacy initiatives that are actually really critical. And I think we should all be mindful of that is happening as well, that there are some really serious competition challenges that we need to grapple with, but there are some cynical efforts to take advantage of the competition concerns to try to ensure the status quo continues to exist.
Thanks, Marshall. I want to really pick up on that point because we do have a few major players which have great power in this marketplace. And of course, as Spider-Man tells us, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think what we are seeing from Apple is an exercise of a great degree of responsibility over this particular aspect of power. I'm not going to go into the whole market model, but I wonder if we could throw that question over about the antitrust, whether some of these participants have too much power to influence light online. We may be straying a little bit just beyond privacy, but let's take Marcel. Do you have any thoughts or observations on that?
I think there is no question about that. There are entities online today that have a lot of power. Also, I need to say, as a person who follows digital policies for basically 2 decades, and someone who comes from the Pirate Party, where my political party as always was always on the side of the opinion that the internet should be decentralized. And what we've been seeing is that even though the core infrastructure per se, the way how the internet is designed is decentralized, we've been seeing that on the higher levels, on the higher layers, the internet is becoming centralized. And I believe that one of the aims that we should have is not to have so many of these monopolies or oligopolies on the internet, and promote more decentralized systems. They do exist, they are out there, however, they didn't really gain much traction. Now, I will tell you one particular example of how I think we should tackle this issue, and that is we should really be strict about the entities online that have monopolies on their segment of their market, or let's say they are dominant on their segment of market, that they are obliged to provide interoperability options for others. So for instance, if we speak about chat system platforms, if we speak about social networks, for instance, that if we speak about that we would have a legislative framework, which should be the Digital Markets Act in the European Union, that would impose obligations on these, that they need to provide APIs and documentation so that other systems could interconnect, and then that would help the users in a way that they could choose their platform. They would not have to be on one particular platform because all of their friends are there, and they would really choose on the basis of if it's really the best service that they can get, if the privacy conditions there are what the users expect, and they could still be in touch with those that are on the major platforms. So this is the way how I see it.
Thank you. So it sounds like you're advocating a sort of enhanced data portability as an alternative to antitrust regulatory action. I've got another couple of questions that have come in. I think I'll throw this one to you, Marshall. Why not reject tracking altogether? Change the business model. Use contextual advertising instead. There are successful examples of this, e.g. Dutch broadcaster. I don't know if you know what Dutch broadcasters are doing, but do you feel able to respond to that?
Yeah, so maybe first I just want to a quick take on your previous question, which I heard to be is there a small number of companies that have too much power today? Like, let's just be very clear about this. Yes, right? Like, I don't think that's a very controversial statement. It's not trivial to figure out what to do about that. But I think none of us should be happy about the amount of centralization that we've seen over the last decade. So the question about contextual targeting. So there are, I think, a number of different options for ways that content can be monetized that do not necessarily require this sort of expansive profile building and then behavioral targeting. Contextual targeting is one potential avenue that I think is really worthwhile exploring, and that a lot of the bigger publishers, I think, are thinking about exploring because they have the brand and the content to really do contextual targeting at scale in a way that might be effective. Another potential approach is for some of those publishers to understand their user base better, to actually use their own first-party data to get to understand, like, who are their consumers and how can they be served most effectively, rather than this expansive tracking profile building that really like gives that data to other parties that shouldn't have it in the first place. So yes, I think there are a bunch of alternative viable options, tracking, profile building, and micro-targeting that we should all be exploring much more.
Thank you. I have a question that's come in. I think it's for Jane, but I think the idea, Tim alluded to international law. This question is coming from Sophie Kwasny of the Council of Europe. And Sophie's having the biggest data protection day of any because she was on a panel of mine about 16 hours ago and continued regional panels around the world. So let's take a moment to respect that endurance and commitment. But Sophie says, Tim mentioned the importance of an international agreement addressing some of the data protection issues he listed. What are your views from a regulatory perspective on possible accession to Convention 108 Plus by the US? Looking forward to the enactment of a federal legislation. That seems ambitious.
Sure, we are absolutely supportive, as Tim said in his remarks, of a strong federal privacy law. And we do think Convention 108 is an interesting model for it. And we are also very much in favor of a law that is strong as GDPR, because I think that it's high time that US has as strong a data protection law as the rest of the world.
Great. Thanks, Jane. Well, I think I've almost exhausted the questions sort of coming in from the chat. Let me just take one more check. We have 10 more minutes, I'm told. I will take another technical question for Apple. I don't want us to dominate, but Apple is able to drive app developers towards higher levels of compliance with information and consent obligations, thanks to being a powerful gatekeeper. What is the reflection on that in light of, for example, the upcoming DMA? And DMA, I'm told, Digital Marketing Act.
If that's for me, I think we are very supportive of the Digital Services Act. On the Digital Markets Act, we are somewhat concerned about the possibility of undermining either encryption or the security of the platform. So we would want to be very cautious about ensuring that any interoperability allows for the protection of privacy and security.
Thank you. The questioner asked that we direct that question also to the MEP. So Marcel, would you like me to run through it again?
Yeah, that would be great. I'm not sure I understood the question.
Yeah. So it says, Apple is able to drive app developers towards higher levels of compliance with information and consent obligations, thanks to being a powerful gatekeeper. What is the reflection on that in light of the upcoming Digital Markets Act, which is a draft law here? I'm not sure where here is, but presumably it's in Europe.
Yeah, yeah, now I understand the question, but I'm not sure I can comment specifically from this angle because I don't really know the needed details about Apple to really understand that and to be able to answer the question. But maybe perhaps, well, I understand the concern here. However, I believe that we need to address a way. We need to address the problem that we have with centralization. And in those parts of the market that we already can see that the market is failing, which I gave examples of the chat system, for instance, and the social networks. I believe that we truly need to do something about it. We need to have these interoperability obligations, because that would also empower users and give them the choice of their provider, of their platform they want to use.
Thank you. Well, let's look forward a little. I mean, what we're seeing, as I said, was, I think, one of the defining moments in the digital age, this transfer of power back to consumers. If it works, I think that would be a great positive. And I think it will start a trend that's going to flow through a whole lot of areas of digital enterprise. But of course, we are not just starting with a clean slate. What do we do about these enormous aggregations of data collected under the old, deceptive, or at least completely opaque regime? Can I ask whether panelists have a view on that? Lucy, is the current law sufficient to ensure that people have the power to have the data holdings expunged from organizations that have collected them, perhaps in ways that are not obvious? Mm-hmm. Perhaps you could speak to the example of the women who were exploited through the use of the Maternity Act. Were they able to achieve an effective remedy?
Well, this is a major problem. So, I started out by talking about the lack of transparency in the industry, and what that means is that as a data subject, it's very difficult for you to exercise your rights. Once your data has been collected, then it becomes very difficult to control it because you don't know who has it. So therefore, it makes it difficult for you to ask companies if they have your data and then delete it as well. So with that example of the parenting club, data protection did its job in that it caught the activity, the company was fined, they had to change their practices, but they were no longer in control of that data that they collected because they'd sold it on so many times. And so now the real question looking forward is what happens to that data, and what are the consequences of that data being out there about all of these people? So it's a very serious question. In our ideal world, we'd like to see, the data that's collected or asked for to be minimized, for it to be stored locally on devices. As Marshall said, no cross-site tracking, and it means that the user should be asked what the data is being collected for and what it's being used for, and that's where it gets messy because of the nature of the industry. That first party at the point of collection probably can't provide an answer to the full extent of the tracking and the profiling and what all the different parties will have access to and what they'll use it for. So that's problematic. So there is a real problem with third-party access, and that's something that in the future that could be looked at.
Thank you. Jane, with Apple stepping into this role and really becoming a quasi-regulator for people in this ecosystem, where are you going to draw the line? I mean, if I say to you, Apple shouldn't allow apps that don't also have a non-retention or deletion process, what are you going to say to that? How far is Apple going to step into this quasi-regulatory role?
So John, we have been very, very focused on the privacy of our users, and we've been very, very focused in making sure that the people who are carrying our devices understand what is happening with their data. So the ATT framework, as I said in my remarks, all it does is ask users to give permission to allow third-party developers to track. It is a transparent transparency and choice mechanism. So, we will be constantly iterating to make sure that our customers feel empowered.
Thank you. I think we are just about out of time, but Marcel, perhaps you could have a closing observation about how you see the interaction with what you're trying to achieve as an MEP and how you work together with industry. A very short response. I think I'm getting a last 2-minute message.
Yeah, I think we have heard a lot of very, interesting insights into it, and I, unfortunately, I cannot really comment on what are the actual steps that Apple has done in order to improve privacy, because I haven't followed that closely. But I also need to appreciate, for instance, what we have heard from Marshall from Mozilla. About how they pay attention to what Firefox need to do in order to protect privacy of users. And I think that if the industry follows in a way that they would like to set a good example, that would make the life easier for everyone. But of course, the legislative initiatives will always be needed, because we just cannot let the industry to self-regulate. Hopefully that answers at least partially your question.
I think it does, and I think it's a really nice note to end on. We are not looking for one big hit solution. We're not devolving our privacy protection to Apple. We're grateful for the support that we're seeing, but it is a multi-stakeholder, multi-party problem. We've got to educate consumers. We've got to support our civil society to act as watchdogs. We've got to empower regulators. And I think really importantly, we've got to settle on some international standards. But I'm excited to have been present at the beginning of this conversation, and I think it's going to run for many years. And I look forward to checking back in with you all over the years to come. Thank you so much for giving your time today.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.